So as Dan's talking about the way that we would design and then construct this kind of a really high-performing wall, like the window, which is not a sort of maybe typical window. You're not going to see this window on the shelves at Home Depot. There's a lot of other materials that go into building a wall and a house like this that aren't kind of typical job site materials. So we talked a little bit about the TJIs that are creating this gap that lets us fill with insulation. Those are attached to a sheathing product that's not a typical wood sheathing. In this case, we used a product that's essentially like drywall. It's got a gypsum core and then a special cover on the outside. But every time two of these panels meet, or any time the window meets the framing, there's a potential for a gap, right? A little thin hole. And that's where you lose that air tightness. You lose that red line that we want to have be continuous around the building. So what did we do? We taped all of these seams. So there's a special kind of tape here, and this tape has the same properties as that black membrane that we showed you a minute ago. It doesn't allow water through in liquid form. It doesn't allow air through, but it does allow moisture through. So that way, if there was water inside this wall somehow, the water can dry. It can move out of the building and the inside can dry out. That makes the building more resilient. It makes it last longer, right? So the other kind of thing we would use is a gasket. So go ahead.
So if there's any of you that are interested in electrical or plumbing, you're probably saying, yeah, you did a nice job building that wall, but I'm going to come through and I'm just going to drill a whole bunch of holes through it, right? Well, we do have to. We have to run electrical and plumbing. People need water and HVAC. We have to get the fresh air and all that. We have to seal around those things, right? Which can be tricky sometimes. So things like this, which is basically that tape we just talked about with a rubber gasket in the center. So when our electricians went through, they drilled their hole and ran their wire through, and then I came back with this and I could just slip this right over that wire and then tape it right onto the wall here. And now we're keeping that wall airtight, right? So all the little things matter when we're talking about the level of airtightness we're getting to.
And the kinds of tapes that we're talking about are really special. They're different. You know, if you went to a typical house that you might see built in DC, you might see a wood sheathed wall go up and they might throw some builder's wrap up. Tyvek is a common brand, right? It's that kind of crinkly, plasticky stuff. And then if someone was doing a pretty good job, they would come through and they would tape the seams, kind of like we taped these seams. They tape the seams of that building paper with some kind of a tape, which is kind of frankly, it's kind of a glorified packing tape. It's the same consistency, sticks a little bit better. If they put up a window, they might take the time to put this kind of a slightly specialer tape around the window to seal the water from getting into the window cracks and whatnot. But in a building like this, these kinds of tapes aren't going to cut it. They're not durable enough. They don't stick well enough. We don't trust them to last as long as the building needs to last. So instead...
Yeah, and the other point is they're not really designed for that, right? Like this tape is designed for that builder's wrap, which is really just to make sure that water flows over those seams, and they're overlapped so that the water would shed anyways. So when you're talking about air tightness, you're putting stress on this tape it wasn't meant to do. So like Nick talked about, it's kind of a different set of tapes that we use or sealants in buildings like this. And they cost a little bit more, but it's because they are kind of tested and designed to do the things that we need them to do. Like this is a one out of Europe. I think it's from like Sweden or Lithuania. Siga, they're a big name and they're expensive. So you don't want to just use them all the time, but we use this to seal off the roof deck. Okay. And that was one where we were going to tape that and then nobody was going to see that sheathing for a very long time. So we wanted to make sure that this was able to stretch and still stay adhered over years of expansion and contraction. Then on the sheathing, you might see if you're driving around, these buildings go up and they look all green, right? Well, there's a type of sheathing that's called zip sheathing that has a weather-resistant barrier, kind of like that Tyvek, but it's part of the panel. And so then at the seams, you'd use this black tape. It's called zip tape. And this is really cool because it's specifically designed to be watertight and airtight with those panels, okay? So when you take this and stick it on, and then Nick's got a roller in his hands because this is actually pressure activated tape. So you kind of tap it on with your hand, but then you come back and roll it down so that every inch of this gets the amount of pressure that it needs. And once you do that, if you tried to peel it off after that, it sometimes takes the edge of the sheathing with it because it's that stuck on. So the point of us describing all this is that a lot of things may look the same on a kind of normal code-built house versus a house like this, but they're not exactly the same. There's a specific reason that when you're designing a house like this, you pick specific products to use, and it's important for people in the field like me to realize that the architects, the engineers, the energy modelers picked those products for a specific reason and use them in those sections. Now you're saying, okay, well that tape looks great because that's flat and it's super easy. You're just going across the thing. What happens when you get in on these corners and stuff like that? How do you keep a really good air seal when you're doing three-dimensional geometry like that? Well, honestly, in a lot of cases, it's not the easiest thing to do that with tape. So they also make sealants, okay, that are that high-end sealant too. This is one that comes in a sausage because it's a little bit cheaper than getting it in just a caulking tube gun. And you would use it in a sausage gun like this, and you'd slide it in and it'd come out. And these are really cool, and I really like this one because it's not temperature cured, it's moisture cured. So I could use this even when it's raining. If it's cold, you don't usually want to use it in freezing temperatures, but if it's a normal, just kind of fall, cold day, I can still use it, it's gonna work. And so I could squeeze this out on all those seams and then come back with a trowel and just smooth it out. And when it cures, now I have it'd be like one perfect piece of tape that was molded specifically to that part that I was trying to seal. So these are really important and cool.